There's tension in Northern Ireland tonight, the tension of indecision. But there's also relief, of course, that they've got their general election safely out of the way. The election's taken place against a tortuous background of personal, religious and political squabbles. It's involved a collection of parties bewildering to outsiders. It's had the spectacle of a Prime Minister showering acid abuse on members of his own party, even on some of his former cabinet ministers. In short, it's been a political show that's had the rest of Britain looking on with fascination and disbelief. And now Ulster's 900,000 voters have made their decision. But by now you may be having difficulty in remembering why and how it all started. So here's a reminder to put you in the picture. For 48 years, the Ulster Unionists have had an unshakable grip on the province. The Ulster Parliament has 52 seats, and only 6 of them were even marginal, because either the Unionists or their main rivals, the Nationalists, had most of the others sewn up pretty tightly. Now that changed last October when there was a clash between civil rights demonstrators and police at Londonderry, which led to charges of police brutality. The result was talks between Mr Wilson and Ulster's Prime Minister, Captain O'Neill. Promises of reform followed, but they weren't enough for the demonstrators. But many of Captain O'Neill's 37 MPs found them not enough, but too much, or at least misguided. One dissenting minister was sacked by O'Neill. 2 more then resigned, and 12 backbenchers announced that they wanted a new leader. So Captain O'Neill took the battle for his reforms over their heads and to the people. The result has been an impassioned election, but one almost free of violence, except for the verbal kind. We're waiting to see if Captain O'Neill has now won his gamble. Well, the prizes are 52 parliamentary seats, as we said, but only 45 have been contested this time. The results in 37 of those should be known overnight. In the other 8 seats, there won't be a result until sometime tomorrow morning. Now, polling stopped at 8:30 tonight, and we did think that by now we might have a very early result in. In fact, nothing has so far come in, and so far again there's been none of the first pointers towards Ulster's and particularly O'Neill's fate. Anyway, let's now move over to Vincent Kane at the computer centre in the Balmoral studio in Belfast.
No, Michael, we're still in that peculiar state of suspended animation, waiting for the first result to come through. But we have several pointers to go by. As you said just now, there are only 45 contested seats out of 52. But remember that last time there were only 29 contested seats, so many thousands of Ulstermen are voting for the first time in a Stormont election. Last time the turnout was 58%. Tonight there are rumours of 80%, even of a 90% turnout in some places. So it is a crisis election, a crisis for Captain O'Neill, a crisis for the Unionist Party, and a crisis for Ulster as a whole. Can we, at this point, before the first result comes through, can we find any clues to solve the riddle? Well, I think the biggest clue of all is how will the Catholics vote? We know that Captain O'Neill made a big appeal to win their support. Martin Wallace of the Belfast Telegraph, do you think it's likely that Catholics will support Captain O'Neill?
I think so. Certainly if there's a heavy turnout, it means that the Catholics have voted, and in some constituencies this is absolutely vital to the return of pro-O'Neill candidates.
But if they do vote for O'Neill now, does this mean the end of the nationalist cause in Northern Ireland?
No, not at all, because the strongly nationalist areas are the ones where there is an overwhelming Catholic majority. These will still remain nationalist, but nationalism itself is going to change. But the critical areas are the ones where there is a Protestant majority, but the Protestant vote is split between pro-O'Neill and anti-O'Neill. If the Catholics swing in behind the pro-O'Neill candidate, then he's likely to win.
What is Captain O'Neill looking for tonight? What result does he want to be able to say that this is a victory for him?
Well, I would say if he could get rid of, let's say, 5 of the 10 rebel MPs who are still in the fight, he then has won a very handsome victory.
Is he likely to do that?
I think he has a fair chance, yes.
How much chance is there, though, of a few months from now, Northern Ireland being back in square one with 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 dissident MPs and another general election?
Well, I think if you can get this number down to 5, you'll find that it won't be added to by the incoming MPs whose stand is a little uncertain in some cases. I think if they find the rebels have been really beaten, they'll not want to become rebels themselves.
Well, now let's go across to our computer, presided over by David Butler. David, is it possible in a confused election like this, with pro-O'Neill Unionists and anti-O'Neill Unionists. Is it possible to talk in terms of predictions and swings?
I think I could promise that I shan't use the word swing at all tonight. You really can't talk about swings unless you've got something to compare it with. In this election, there were only 29 seats of the 52 were fought last time. Another 7 of them have had their boundaries changed quite drastically. And then only 6 seats being fought tonight were fought by the same pattern of candidates in 1965. So, well, you can't do any detailed comparisons of that sort. However, obviously, there's a great deal the computer can do to help us to understand the result, to measure the strength of the O'Neill and the anti-O'Neill forces where having a straight fight, and to see how far the O'Neill unionism has cut into the traditional Catholic vote, which stayed at home or voted for fringe parties. It's going to be very interesting to see how the 4 or 5 fringe parties flourishing in this election flourish, whether they do in fact survive or whether they get swept aside in the great thing of for or against O'Neill, which seems to be the dominant theme of the whole election.
Well, all this remains to be seen. For the time being, this is Vincent Kane in Belfast.
And we'll be going back to Belfast later in the programme, and again for our special programme, which begins about 11:45, when we'll have Vincent Kane there and David Butler and the computer and many more reports from the actual constituencies as the results come in. In the meantime now from a battle of power in Ulster to a diplomatic drama. Here's Robert McKenzie.
Whatever President
Almost as old the problem of Anglo-French relations is the problem of Anglo-Irish relations, and especially, of course, the problem of Ulster. Now, this is the man who really started it, James I. He sent English and Scottish colonists to set up plantations in Ulster. They weren't liked, but they got a helping hand from Oliver Cromwell. He wiped out 2 Irish towns and beat the Catholic population into submission. And then James II, a Catholic, was forced to give up the throne to William of Orange, a Protestant. But James rallied Catholics in Ireland. In 1690, he besieged the city of Derry. But King Billy's men relieved the city and put pay to James and his army at the Battle of the River Boyne.
Come, let us all with heart and voice applaud our faith's defender, who at the Boyne his valour showed and made his foe surrender. To God above the praise we'll give, both now and ever after, and bless the glorious memory of King William that crossed the Boyne water.
But the rest of Ireland didn't have God on its side. A revolt against the English in 1798 was led by a Protestant, Wolfe Tone. It was a bloody failure, but an inspiration for Irish nationalists.
Well, they fought for poor old Ireland, and full bitter was their fate. Oh, what glorious pride and sorrow fills the name of '98. Yet, thank God, while hearts are beating deep in manhood's burning noon, we will follow in their footsteps by the rising of the moon.
By the middle of the last century, millions of Irish people had either emigrated or died of starvation. But the political struggle continued. They had a leader at Westminster, Charles Parnell, and Gladstone himself took up the cause of Home Rule with a united Ireland ruled from Dublin. But this was an explosive issue because the Protestants of Ulster had found a leader too, Sir Edward Carson. They'd fought in 1690 to stay British. They'd helped the British to put down rebellion. But now they were the rebels. They bought their guns from Germany and enjoyed the support of England's Conservative Party.
The cry of home still burns inside each loyal Ulster heart. There's people still within this land who tear us all apart. From Union Jack and Queen, they try with all their might, but Ulster men will fight, and Ulster will be right. So ever watchful so brightly in the blue, with rifles at the ready, be on your guard tonight, for Ulster men will fight, and Ulster will be right. Loyal Ulster men unite, for Ulster's cause is right.
They fought, but beside, not against, the Catholic Irish in the Great War. Home Rule was shelved, but in 1916 there was rebellion in Dublin. It was ruthlessly suppressed.
Oh, wrap the green flag around me, boys, to die were far more sweet. With Ireland's noble emblem, boys, to be my winding sheet. In life I love to see it wave and follow where it led. But now my eyes grow dim, my hand would grasp its last bright shred. But oh, my body moulders, boys, my spirit shall be free. And every comrade's honour, boys, will be so dear to me. And in the thick and bloody fight, let not your courage lag, for I'll be there and hovering near around the dear old flag.
From then on, the Irish fought for their independence. They suffered cruelties at the hands of the Black and Tans, and the militants of the Irish Republican Army wouldn't accept partition of the country.
And we're all off to Dublin in the green, with our helmets glistening in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash to the echo of a Thompson gun. I'm sick and tired of slavery since the day that I was born, so I'm off to join the IRA, and I'm off tomorrow morn. And I'll take my short revolver and my bandolier of lead, and do or die I can but try to avenge my country's dead. And we're all off to Dublin in the green, with our helmets glistening in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash to the echo of a Thompson gun.
But Ireland was divided. The 6 counties of Ulster stuck with Britain. The threat from across the border and memories of past hatred are what now keep most Ulstermen so resolute in their Protestantism and unionism. And the Orange Brotherhood, Orange Day, the so-called Orange Men, still revere King William III.
Orange man, from Erin I came to see my Glasgow brethren, all of honour and of fame, and to tell them of my forefathers who fought in days of yore. And on the 12th day of July, in the sash my father wore. Sure, it's old, but it is beautiful. It's the best you've ever seen. It was worn at Derry Aughrim in a skillen and the vine. From my orange and purple forefathers, it descended with galore. It's a terror to them Papish boys, the sash my father wore.
Our singers were Bob Craig from the north and Noel Murphy from the south. Peter Greenwell arranged the music. Most of the songs, of course, were of times a long time ago. Oh, I think there's a result. We're going straight over now to Enniskillen.
and I declare Henry William West duly elected to serve as the member for that constituency.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Mr. Returning Officer, Mr. Mayor, my lord, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your kind reception. And I know this is not a time for political speeches, nor do I intend to make any. But I think it's my duty, first of all, on behalf of the candidates in this election, to thank most sincerely the Returning Officer and his staff for all the work that they have done and the orderly manner in which they have organized this particular election. And of course, for myself, I would like to thank most sincerely the great band of good workers and sound people that supported me in this election. And I'm glad indeed and very proud of the fact that the vast majority of the good, sound, sensible unionist people in County Fermanagh supported...
Right, let's have a quick look at those Enniskillen figures. Dennis Archdale, unofficial unionist, 2,418. Bowes Egan, People's Democratic, 2,784. Harry West, unionist, 4,891, which makes a unionist majority of 2,107. Over to you, Billy Flackes, for comment.
Well, this will be a disappointment to Captain O'Neill's supporters. In fact, Mr. Harry West's vote is about twice that of Mr. Dennis Archdale, the unofficial pro-O'Neill unionist. The figures were 4891 for Mr. West, 2418 for Mr. Archdale. Mr. Bowes Egan of the People's Democracy, of course, got 2784. He got even more than the pro-O'Neill candidate. This would seem to suggest that Catholics, very generally in Enniskillen, did turn out for the People's Democracy candidate. And if this result is then to go by in Fermanagh, it would suggest that Captain John Brooke should be able to hold Lisnaskea.
Right, well, let's see how that computer of ours is helping us at this stage. Over to David Butler at Balmoral.
Well, our first two results did, in fact, of course, both change hands, leading to seats changing hands. In Pottinger, there was a swing. I use the word because it was a straight fight last time and this time. There was a swing of 9% from Labour to the Unionists. And there was also a 9% increase in the poll. And indeed, in Enniskillen, where we've just had the result, the poll was over 86%. That's 13% up on the last time. Mr. Harry West there did, in fact, get less than half the total votes cast. He only got 48% of the votes cast. In Central Belfast, where there was also a change of hands, the vote divided 57%, 43%, the Republican Labour over the sitting National Democrat. And there the turnout was 56%, lower, more down to the levels that have been accustomed in past elections. But I think there's one certain prediction, that we're going to have very, very much higher turnouts in the great bulk of the results we get tonight.
Well, thank you. And at this point, I should welcome 24 Hours viewers in Britain to the Northern Ireland election scene. As you can see at the moment, we're very busy, and we're just going across to the City Hall, Belfast, for an interview.
Well, with me now in Clarence Place Hall, the new MP for Belfast Central, very excited Paddy Kennedy. Paddy, you went pretty hard on this one, and you're pretty tough on in this fight. Why was that?
Well, I believe in fighting elections to win them, not to come second. I don't see any point in contesting elections unless you're fighting to win. And this is what I did. Yeah. I fought to win Central.
At one point, you mentioned that perhaps the National Democrats were rather like Green Tories. What do you mean by Green Tories?
Well, I am a Connolly socialist. I am a Republican. I am a Labour man. I believe in the political philosophy of James Connolly. I believe that a political party should be judged by its political philosophy and also by the manner in which its public representatives carry out that philosophy in practice. I believe that in the Republican Labour Party, particularly with Jerry Fitt, we have carried out a very good job in representing people.
Yes. Yes. Well, could I say one thing to you? Because I read a number of your speeches and there was very little references to the social problems. Why was this?
Well, if you had read my first comment on this election, I said that there was a danger it would develop into a personality contest, and I felt that many of the bread and butter issues were in fact been missed.
Yes.
I am afraid that they have been missed on many occasions.
It was a small count. You're satisfied, and a small turnout too. This disappoint you?
Well, it doesn't
very
really.
Quickly.
It doesn't really. The register on which this election was fought was based on September 1967, my area or Central constituency has been redeveloped. A large number of voters have gone out of Central.
Mr. Kennedy, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
This is
And at this point, for comment on the situation so far, over to our political correspondent, WD Flackes.
Well, perhaps we could look first at the state of the parties. There are now 8 Unionist MPs, 1 Nationalist and 1 Republican Labour. Up to now, we've had 3 results, and 2 of these have been from Belfast. Coming to the left here of our scoreboard, we have the Pottinger division here, and this has been won by Alderman Joyce Cardwell, a Unionist alderman in Belfast. It's been won from Martin McBurney, QC, who was defending the seat formerly held by the leader of the Northern Ireland Labour Party, Mr. Tom Boyd. Mr. Cardwell won by a majority of only 158. But of course this is significant, this result, because it does mean it looks as if the opposition are being squeezed in this battle between pro and anti-O'Neill Unionists. It's also significant in that Mr. Cardwell is generally regarded as veering towards support for Captain O'Neill, so that this would add to Captain O'Neill's strength in the parliamentary party. Now we come to the second Belfast result, which is Central. This was formerly held by one of the minor parties, a National Democrat, and now it's been won by a member of Jerry Fitt's Republican Labour Party by a majority of 494. Perhaps I could leave it there, the situation there for the moment.
Right, thank you very much, Billy. Well, now let's let our newspaper men have a look in and join our journalists in our Balmoral studio with Vincent Kane.
Well, what do the gentlemen of the press make of that result from Enniskillen? Because if Mr. West's majority, Mr. Wallace, is only cut by 800, what price that clear-cut landslide victory for O'Neill now?
Yes, mind you, it's interesting that he had less than 50% of the votes. I'm surprised that the People's Democracy candidate did as well as he did. But I think we may be seeing something which will occur in other constituencies, perhaps in the west of Ulster, where I think there is more anti-O'Neill feeling. We may find that the Unionist critics who are there do quite well, and it may be in the east of the province that O'Neill does better.
But less than 50% on no, the pro-O'Neill candidate came bottom of the poll here.
He did, yes, and obviously the Catholic vote in this constituency has gone to People's Democracy, and it will be interesting to see whether the People's Democracy intervention has a similar effect in other constituencies.
James Kelly, are you surprised by this result in Enniskillen at all?
Not in the least. Fermanagh has always been a law unto itself, and it has certainly been the centre of much of the opposition to O'Neill for more than a year now. And I think most people expected this result. But what is interesting is the turnout for the People's Democracy candidate, who's a young man virtually unknown here, and I think it does indicate that the Catholic voters of Enniskillen are not enamoured of the 5 points, the 5 reforms. They don't think that that was enough, and they followed the People's Democracy view in this matter.
Mr. Pawley, can you go along with that or not?
Well, I would say that the Enniskillen result must be a disappointing surprise to Captain O'Neill. Not because Mr. West got in. I think that was expected, but as what Martin here said, that as the Roman Catholic vote, obviously, a substantial proportion of it went to the People's Democracy man. But at the same time, I agree, it must be remembered that Enniskillen is a rather die-hard Unionist area, has been for years and years, and this obviously assured Mr. West's return.
Well, thank you. Vincent Kane at Balmoral.
Well, let's see, we've gathered from what Michael Baguley said. While we've been on the air, the people of Northern Ireland have had their own programme, especially about the election, and we happened rather hurriedly there to eavesdrop on it. We will be doing so again as we come back on the air for our special election programme at 11:45 tonight. I'll just make one point so far about the election, which I didn't hear made there. I think we made it earlier, that in a sense this is a kind of personal referendum for Captain O'Neill himself, and the figures so far, including the uncontested seats, that is, show 6 candidates in for Captain O'Neill, 1 very much against him, and a further 1 with a question mark against his name because he's uncommitted. That then is the state, not of the parties, but of the people for and against Captain O'Neill as of now. We'll be back at about 11:45. Until then, cheerio. And welcome back to part 2 of 24 Hours, our election special, bringing you the results and comment on these results from the general election in Northern Ireland, bringing it to you from our studio here in London and from Northern Ireland itself. Here in London with Bob McKenzie, we have Norman St John Stevens, Conservative MP, and Paul Rose, Labour MP, who'll be discussing particularly the repercussions of this election on politics at Westminster. And I might point out at this stage, as I did earlier, that this election in a very important sense is a kind of referendum for Captain O'Neill. At least if you look at it in that sense, it might be a little bit more easy to understand. Now, the results are coming thick and fast now. There are 26 in so far, and as of this moment, 12 of them are candidates who are for Captain O'Neill, the Prime Minister, 5 are against him, and 2 are uncommitted. And the experts are saying that the support for O'Neill at the moment is not as large as they predicted it might be, and there's just a dangerous possibility, which obviously we'll discuss later in the programme, of Northern Ireland going back to square one with the Unionist Party split down the middle. More of that later. Let's look at our results board, the state of the parties there on my left, with the Unionist Party already having taken 19 seats, underneath them the unofficial Unionists. Now here again is a further complication, because the official Unionists are not necessarily supporters of Captain O'Neill. Some of them are against him, and similarly the unofficial ones are for and against Captain O'Neill. We'll try to keep you posted as to who's who as the programme goes along. Now, while we're talking here in London, people in Northern Ireland are listening to their own programme from the Belfast studio, and we'll be eavesdropping on them too during the programme. Finally, let me tell you that we have a computer centre over in Belfast with 24 Hours man Vincent Kane there, with David Butler with the computer, of course, and with an expert panel. And let's begin the programme by going right over to them now.
Well, the results are coming in, and so far there's not much comfort for Captain O'Neill. In fact, only one anti-O'Neill candidate has been defeated. David Butler, from the results you've seen so far, can you tell a pattern at all?
Well, on the whole, it seems very much the mixture as before. There have been quite a lot of gains and losses that we've seen, but they've tended to be, well, there have been 3 in Belfast among minor parties that don't affect the main struggle. The only seat that has changed hands has been the one in Belfast where the official candidate, Mr. Hines, who switched from being official to anti-official to being official in a slightly uncertain way during the election, has been defeated. That could be chalked up, perhaps, as a gain to the O'Neill forces. But almost all the other people, Mr. Faulkner and Mr. West, leading candidates, have been re-elected against the O'Neill forces, and there isn't much movement of opinion in an election that has excited a great deal of interest. The turnout is up about 15% on last time.
But remember all those opinion polls of last week which forecast such a landslide victory for Captain O'Neill. Now, where do they stand now? Do they look sick?
They look decidedly sick. It is quite plain that the majority of people have been sticking by the official candidate. As I say, Mr. Hines in Victoria, no, I'm sorry, not in Victoria, in Willowfield, was the only candidate who had the official label, whether he was pro or anti-O'Neill, who has been defeated.
Is there likely to come a time in the near future when we can say whether or not Captain O'Neill is going to be back with a bigger majority, or majority of confidence?
I think we can say that he is going to go back with a slightly bigger majority. There aren't many seats that he is likely to lose. The question is whether he is defeating enough of the anti-O'Neill people. And so far, he has only got one crumb of comfort. There have been 1 or 2 close races. One of the anti-O'Neill forces, out in Derry, Mr. Burns, was in fact only elected by 100-odd votes against a pro-O'Neill man challenging him. But by and large, we've got to wait quite a long time, I think, before we do the final tally. It does turn on 4 or 5 seats, which you've still got to come, and the results have been so unusual. I mean, they've been going all over the shop. They haven't been the sort of uniform national pattern that we have in England. People have been voting much more for the candidate, and therefore we do have to wait and see for these individual results.
Is there any indication yet of how the Catholic vote is going? Is it going to O'Neill as he'd hoped?
Well, no, I don't think there's any indication of this happening. Again, the results have been all over the shop. In some cases, it does seem that, that Catholic votes have gone to Unionist forces, but on the whole, not.
And the Labour Party, can they draw any comfort from the results we've had so far?
Well, no, not much. They've lost 1 seat. They've gained 1 seat in the results so far.
In the Falls constituency, I noticed that a Republican Labour man who's held the seat for 25 years has lost the seat.
There's just been a very important flash. Mr. Morgan has been defeated in Clifton. Now, this is one of the leading anti-O'Neill figures, and this is the first real O'Neill triumph that we've heard yet this evening.
Well, perhaps at this point I could fetch in some of our journalists here. Martin Wallace, first of all, can I ask you, how do you react to Mr. Morgan's defeat?
Well, this is a big gain for Captain O'Neill. Not an unexpected one. I think one would have said this was one of the most likely seats to go his way.
Do you think it's likely now that O'Neill is over the hump, over the hill?
No, I think we're very close to a stalemate. He may gain 1 or 2, but not very substantially more than that.
We're waiting, of course, for the most important result of all, which I gather is due about midnight, and that's the result in Bandside. And that's where Captain O'Neill is fighting the Reverend Ian Paisley. Now, what vote do you think would be dangerous for Paisley to get as far as O'Neill is concerned?
Oh, I don't think this really matters. One can't see the Prime Minister being beaten in his own constituency, but I would think Mr. Paisley could go into almost any constituency in Northern Ireland where there were Protestants and get a substantial vote purely on his own personality. I think he'll do a quarter, a third of the vote, something like this.
Can I ask Mr. James Kelly of the Irish Independent whether you're satisfied so far that Captain O'Neill is going to win?
Well, at the moment, I would say it's 50-50. And I think the best thing that has happened for him so far is the defeat of Mr. Morgan, who's a former minister in his government and one of the chief members of the rebels against the O'Neill.
But surely this is the whole trouble. It was 50-50 before the election. That's why there was an election. Yes. It was 50-50 in the Unionist Party. Aren't we likely at the moment to get the mixture as before, to quote David?
Well, it could go that way, but I would still say it's a bit early yet to say that.
Mervyn Pawley, are you just as pessimistic?
Well, I would say that there are certain indications that O'Neill may go back with an increased majority, but as against that, if we look at the Catholic vote, there are in some constituencies a definite trend towards Catholics voting for anti-O'Neill, anti-Unionist candidates, which may augur not too well for O'Neill.
Can I ask Mr. Andrew Boyd, who's the Ulster correspondent of the Tribune, if you can find any comfort for Labour in the results we've had tonight?
None whatever. In fact, I'm inclined to think that the Labour Party's own forecast of 5 seats is completely haywire. And I'm inclined also to stick by my early prediction that if Captain O'Neill wins this, it will be with a very small margin in his favour.
Next line. Well, we're sort of crashing out of Belfast there to go back almost as abruptly to Northern Ireland, because I gather a declaration is just about due. It's the one in which Major Bunting is standing, who, of course, is the Reverend Ian Paisley's right-hand man. So let's go back again to Northern Ireland for that declaration. Hold that in your hand, too. Here it comes now at long last. Sorry to be a bit Irish about that.
Result of election, the Belfast constituency of Victoria. As Deputy Returning Officer for this constituency, I hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Robert Hamilton Bradford, 9,249. Major Ronald Terence Bunting, 2,489. John Coulthard, 2,972. And I declare that Robert Hamilton Bradford has been duly elected to serve as member for the constituency.
So Major Bunting, as I said, the Reverend Ian Paisley's sidekick, is out. Well, now, perhaps you're getting already rather perplexed. I can assure you, if it's any crumb of comfort, that most of the experts are too. But let's, from this end at least, try to unravel a few knots and over to Bob McKenzie.
Well, reactions from 2 British members of Parliament at Westminster. First of all, Norman St. John Stevens. The first reports seem to suggest that it's going to be a much closer thing than certainly the opinion polls suggested. Is that your feeling?
Yes, I think it is. And I think that what one can see has not happened, and what I myself rather hoped would happen, was that there would be a very massive swing of the Catholic vote in Northern Ireland behind Captain O'Neill. That, in fact, has not happened. And as a result, I think that Captain O'Neill's position at the moment is very much in the balance. I regret that this hasn't happened for this reason. that I think Captain O'Neill's initiative in righting long-established civil wrongs in fact gave the opportunity for the first time in 50 years for a real break-up in Northern Ireland politics. If you could have got a situation where Catholics voted massively for Captain O'Neill and his supporters, then you would have got an acceptance of the Constitution of Northern Ireland de facto by Catholics, which could have transformed the whole situation. And I very much fear that this has not happened as far as one can see.
Paul Rose, Labour.
Well, I think we may be seeing the worst of all possible worlds in that Captain O'Neill may marginally improve his position, but in fact will not have the sort of room to manoeuvre that he hoped for. And in that situation, one may revert to the position where the civil rights movement is asking for more reforms. Captain O'Neill will then still be a prisoner of his own right wing and will be back to the sort of chaos that we had before. And if that happens, then I think the pressures will mount on this side of the Irish Sea for direct government intervention in Northern Ireland affairs, either financially or even politically.
Yes, I agree that is the worst possible result, because what one hoped for from this election is that Ulster would be able to settle its own affairs satisfactorily, and we wouldn't have the burden of it at Westminster. And I agree that it looks as though this happy outcome is going to escape us.
Well, we'll look in a moment at what might be the consequences for London and for Westminster, but of course one has to keep in mind it's a very small House of 52, and a majority of 1 or 2, if O'Neill does get that at the end of the day, is a working majority, probably, granted the size of the House. Prime Ministers have ruled for long periods with majorities of that size in small legislatures, so it's a bit early to assume he can't govern successfully.
And one must also remember this particular point, that it's assumed, it has been assumed, because of these favourable polls and comments, that Captain O'Neill would have a sweeping victory. Well, it's really a very great achievement for Captain O'Neill to have been able to take this stand and not, in fact, be sweepingly defeated.
Well, back now to Mike Barrett.
Well, whoever does win today's election will still have one factor of Ulster political life to deal with, the extremist Protestants. That's whether they win even any seats or not. They've been standing as candidates in this election, of course, and there was a great deal of interest as to how much support they'd get. Now, one of them, we mentioned earlier, was Major Ronald Bunting. He's been standing in Belfast against a leading unionist, Roy Bradford, Captain O'Neill's chief whip and Minister of Commerce. Now, David Lomax has been talking to Mr. Bunting.
Major Ronald Bunting is Mr. Paisley's principal lieutenant and self-styled commandant of the loyal citizens of Ulster. He's been campaigning as a Protestant unionist, pending an appeal against a prison sentence and 4 other outstanding charges, all connected with the recent civil rights demonstrations. He's also been dismissed from his post as a maths lecturer at the local technical college. So far, Protestant extremism has been an unknown quantity here, but tonight's results will show how many people, like Major Bunting, really believe that Ian Paisley is Ulster's saviour. Major Bunting, how did you first become associated with Dr. Paisley?
I became he became my spiritual father as I was converted to Christ through his ministry about 3 years ago.
What do you think of him as a man?
He's a wonderful man. He's a man who is head and shoulders above any other personality in Northern Ireland. And indeed, I would say that in my travels around the world, I've seldom met as humble or faithful and honest a servant of God.
Now that you're associated with the cause of Protestant unionism, I notice you've got a rosette which has the words "No Surrender" on it.
Yes.
No surrender against what?
Well, it's no surrender. I don't know whether your camera can pick that up there, but there's no surrender to the forces of evil which are manifested in Northern Ireland through the Roman Church, i.e. Popery, and its active allies in the world revolutionary movement at the moment, i.e. the so-called Trotskyites or revolutionary socialists or
you see them all as the same thing?
No, I don't. The Romanists, in fact, have been duped, as the IRA have been duped here in Ulster, by the revolutionary socialist movement, which is a bushfire that has spread right away from as far apart as Tokyo, to Paris, to Mexico City, to New York. The headquarters from which Northern Ireland obtains its instructions, or the Northern Ireland revolutionaries obtain their instructions, is at your London School of Economics, by the way.
Major Bunting, what do you mean in Ulster when you use the word popery?
There are many individual Roman Catholics who are personal friends of mine, and I hate this sort of interview because normally it's misconstrued.
What do you mean by popery?
But by popery I mean the machinations of the Church of Rome, the Roman Curia, not even the Pope himself, who I believe is a slave of the hierarchy in Rome.
But are you seriously suggesting that the Roman Catholic Church is trying to undermine Ulster?
The Roman Catholic Church has never lost sight of its primary objective of absorbing Ulster into a 32-county Republic of Ireland.
Where is the evidence for this now? I mean, these sort of things may have meant something 20 or 30 years ago, but are they really relevant today?
Well, I suggest to you that you perhaps are misinformed coming over here, or you have not looked at the evidence. The Roman Church, I'm stating categorically, has never recognized Ulster. The Roman Church has no padre or representative in Stormont to take prayers for the Roman members. The Roman Church has never sent one of its bishops or cardinals to pay respect to Her Majesty's representative at Hillsborough. I think Lord Brookborough, our former Prime Minister and a Privy Councillor, answered your question very effectively the other day when he said there are two types of people in Ulster. There are loyalists and there are disloyalists, and the majority of the disloyalists are Romanists.
Are you seriously suggesting that they're disloyal? How does this show itself?
It manifests itself in many ways. It manifests itself in their failure to stand for the national anthem. They rush out of the cinemas and so on. I'm sorry to say, accompanied by many people of my particular belief at this time.
What do you think Captain O'Neill is trying to do in Ulster?
Captain O'Neill, at the present time, is attempting desperately to hang on to power in Northern Ireland. Captain O'Neill is like the leech which was attacking Humphrey Bogart's body in the picture of the African Queen. When it was extracted by Kathleen Hepburn and held up, you know, with his little tail clinging like that, and then disposed of in the river. It had the opportunity of coming back up onto his body and sucking parasitically at the blood of Bogart again. Now O'Neill is like that at the moment, and if the electors of Ulster are foolish enough to drop him back into the stream, he will certainly attack the body of Ulster again. But if we have the good sense to crush that leech and dispose of it finally, then I think this man will no longer be in a position to destroy the Unionist Party, to attack the constitution of our land, and to attempt to take away everything from us that we hold dear, i.e. our attachment to United Kingdom as an integral part, our love for the Crown.
David Lomax was talking to Major Ronald Bunting of the Paisleyite Protestant Unionists before the poll, of course, and we have since learned the result, Belfast, Victoria, which was that Major Bunting was right at the bottom of the poll and was very soundly defeated indeed by Mr. Bradford, who was Captain O'Neill's Minister of Commerce in the last government. Now over to Bob McKenzie.
Norman Stevens, as a Conservative and a Catholic, what has been your reaction to the kind of charge that Major Bunting has just been making there, that in fact Captain O'Neill would like to take Northern Ireland out of this alliance with the United Kingdom and so on? I mean,
well, of course, that is rubbish. I mean, not as a Catholic and as a Conservative, but as an ordinary intelligent person, or an average intelligent person, which I would claim to be, that is obvious nonsense. That is not Captain O'Neill's intention at all, and no reasonable person could possibly believe it. I have nothing against Major Bunting or the Reverend Hugh Beattie, both of whom have been defeated. I'm very glad they were defeated, not for any personal reason, but because they represent an extreme Protestant viewpoint, which, if it were to triumph, would be a disaster for Northern Ireland, whether people were Catholic or whether they're Protestant, because it would mean a long history of civil discord and strife in the future.
But what about the charge, though, that the Catholic Church in Northern Ireland has not really accepted the Constitution?
Well, no cardinal apparently has gone along to Government House. Well, I'm perfectly prepared myself to go on behalf of the Catholic Church, and there are a great many Catholics in Northern Ireland who think like me, and a great many Catholics in this country who think like me. But I do think there is this amount of substance in the criticism. I think that in this new situation created by Captain O'Neill, who has already placed his own career and his own party's future on the line for the good of Ulster, then I think that could have evoked a response from Cardinal Conway and other members of the Irish hierarchy to have recognised in unambiguous terms the Constitution of Northern Ireland, because here's a new opportunity to get rid of civil disabilities for Catholics. Captain O'Neill is offering that. I think in return there should be a generous response from the Irish hierarchy to this situation.
Paul Rose, you've been following the results while we were looking at the film. Anything new on the O'Neill battle as you've seen it?
Well, I think the interesting result is the result from Shankill, where Desmond Bowl has held the seat. He is an anti-O'Neill candidate. And it seems to me that although there have been marginal improvements for Captain O'Neill, indeed the anti-O'Neill candidates are shaping up quite well. But what seems to be particularly important is who has the party ticket. And in this situation, the Northern Ireland Labour Party has squeezed out in the battle between the pro and anti-O'Neill candidates.
For the moment, thank you.
Actually, the latest figures we have on that are, and this is, I said, the central theme you should keep your eye on through this evening, are that so far there are 16 candidates for O'Neill who are in, there are 6 against, and there are 2 uncommitted. Nonetheless, the word I have from Ireland is that the anti-O'Neill faction is doing rather better than was expected. But let's go directly across now to William Flack, the political correspondent in the Belfast studio.
For instance, the Labour Party, they've lost Pottinger and they've gained Falls. They've also held Old Park. So rather mixed fortunes for the Labour Party and lower votes generally all round. The Republican Labour Party have gained Central. Of course, they've lost Falls, and Jerry Fitt has held Dock. So for Labour and Republican Labour, they're just as they were in the last Parliament at the moment, 2 seats each. Nationalists, of course, haven't lost or gained any seats so far, holding 2. Mr. Roddy O'Connor, who's in the studio, and Mr. Tom Gormley in Mid-Tyrone. 2 unofficial unionist gains, that was in Willowfield and in Clifton. 22 official unionists at the moment. But I think it would strain your nerves and those of the viewers to go through all these facts and figures we've assembled so far, but perhaps you want to go to some other source.
OK, Billy, thank you very much. Well, I think at this time we should join once again those newspaper journalist friends of ours in our Balmoral studio with Vincent Kane. I'm sorry, my mistake there. I should have been going over to David Butler at Balmoral. David Butler.
In fact, I'm glad they have come to us, gentlemen of the press, because Mr. Bowl was making some remarks about the press just now. If I remember, he was suggesting that the way you'd covered this election left much to be desired. Any comment on that? Mr. Boyd first.
Well, I wouldn't like to make a comment on what Mr. Bowl said, but I would like to draw your attention to what may be a great danger for O'Neill as a result of this election. You notice that unofficial pro-O'Neill candidates have been returned. And in fact, he may find himself with depleted support in the Parliamentary Unionist Party when the Parliamentary Unionist Party assembles, because they certainly will not accept these unofficial members into the Parliamentary Unionist Party. And he may be worse off as a result of the election than he was before.
I'm going to try and get a comment on Mr. Bowles' remarks about the press. Mr. Wallace, would you like to have a go?
Well, I think this is an old hobby horse of Mr. Bowles and others who think like him, but I think they're never very specific about their complaint, and I think there's a confusion here between news coverage and the editorial opinion of papers. Now, I think by and large, most papers, not all papers, but most papers have been fairly sympathetic to what Captain O'Neill has been trying to do. But I don't think there's been any particular bias in their news coverage.
Well, before I hand over to David Butler, any comment to make on Mr. Bowles' result?
Well, I think, again, we've a result a little like Mr. West's. He hasn't quite got 50% of the vote.
Fine. David Butler?
Well, in the last Parliament, there were some 37 Unionist MPs. They've gained 1 seat net on the results now. So if nothing changes in the remaining seats, they'll have 38 members out of the 52 in the next Parliament. But 7 of those we know already will be people who've been identified as anti-O'Neill candidates. And if there's no change in the remaining results, there are 5 more people who are known as, or thought of as anti-O'Neill candidates who will be elected. So that would face 12 anti-O'Neill candidates. It would be fairly much the mixture as before.
At this point, of course, I should have before welcomed viewers to BBC One Network, and we hope we'll bring you something up to date on the Northern Ireland election scene here. And what better place to go now than the Bandside constituency and our outside broadcast unit in Ballymena.
Ladies and gentlemen, as returning officer for the county of Antrim, I have to announce... Ladies and gentlemen, as returning officer for the county of Antrim, I have to announce the result of the count for the Bandside division. The voting was as follows. Michael Farrell, 2,310 votes. Terence Marn O'Neill, 7,745 votes. Ian Richard Kyle Paisley, 6,331 votes. I accordingly declare Terence Marn O'Neill duly elected as the representative for the Bandside division.
The reporters here are calling for a repeat of the figures.
331.
6,331. Terence O'Neill would like to think it was 331.
A majority of 1,411.
Oh, that's just 95%.
What was he, ladies? 5%?
5%.
Ladies and gentlemen, as chairman of Bandside Unionist Association, I would like to take this opportunity of thanking our returning officer and the staff for the courteous and an efficient manner in which they have carried out this count. We are delighted that our Prime Minister has returned once again, and for the sanity of the people of Bandside as they have shown themselves on this occasion.
He's afraid to come to the count.
That would have been a sad day. That would have been a sad day.
To come to the count.
I'll not interrupt you, Mr.
No, because you couldn't.
No.
You haven't truth on your side.
I have proof on my side.
You haven't truth on your side. What about the lost deposit now? Come on, where's the lost deposit now?
That would be a
Mr. Coroner.
I never said that you would lose your deposit.
Did say
Never,
it.
never in my life.
You did say it.
It would be a sad day for Bandside and for Northern Ireland if Captain O'Neill hadn't been returned
Shame on you.
as a member for Bandside, and we hope to be the future Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. Thank you very much. And your whole staff for the efficient manner in which they carried out this count.
Mr. Returning Officer, I would like to second the vote of thanks, but not the audacious, insulting remarks to the loyalists of Bandside that have been offered by Dr. Simpson here this evening. I would remind Dr. Simpson that in the Bandside there are 6,331 true blue Protestants who will never bow the knee to the capitulation policy of Captain O'Neill. And I would like to say that the Unionist Party, controlled by Captain O'Neill, did everything in this election to try and hinder the Protestant people recording their vote. Today, in the Central School at Randallstown, a booth was locked and the ballot papers were taken out of the school into the back seat of a car. And these papers were given to members of Bandside to vote outside the proper voting place. Is this the way to conduct a properly ordered election? Mr. Returning Officer, let me say today that if you take the two figures, you will find that Captain O'Neill
is a minority candidate, and he does not represent the majority of the people in the Bandside. And I want to say that with the press against me and with Captain O'Neill's machinery and smears against me and Dr. Simpson's joke that there were a few pockets of free Presbyterians in the Bandside and that I would forfeit my deposit, I have tonight 6,331 votes in my favor, and if this campaign had gone for another 7 days, we would have swept the traitor out of the Bandside.
All right, we're expecting another declaration now coming up. Listener ski this time, so let's go over to Enniskillen.
We're waiting for the result now at Liston Ski to see whether Captain John Brooke...
Mr. Mayor, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, as returning officer for the constituency of Liston Ski, I hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election for that constituency was as follows. John W. Brooke, 4,794. Malachi Carey, 1,726. James D.A. Henderson, 2,702. And I declare that Captain John W. Brooke has been duly elected to serve as the member for that constituency.
Captain Brooke goes back to Stormont with an increased majority.
Now, let's just look at the figures once again for Listener Ski. John Brooke, Unionist, 4,794. Malachi Carey, People's Democratic, 1,726. James Henderson, Unofficial Unionist, 2,701. So that's a Unionist majority for Listener Ski of 2,093. And we have another result coming up now from Ballymena.
Ladies and gentlemen, the result of the mid-Antrim election. The poll today on the 24th, the poll today showed that there were 2,124 votes cast for Robert Hugh Galbraith. There were 10,249 votes cast for Robert Simpson. In pursuance of the powers vested in me as Deputy Returning Officer for the said constituency, and as required by law, I hereby declare the aforesaid Robert Simpson to be elected Member of Parliament for the Mid-Antrim constituency.
Well, Billy Flackes, could we have comment from you on that one?
Well, of course, that was a sensational result in Bandside. I don't think even the most ardent of Reverend Ian Paisley supporters would have reckoned that he'd poll over 6,000 votes. And in fact, the Prime Minister's majority over Mr. Paisley is only 11% of the total poll, which indicates how close it was. A majority of 1,414 in a total poll of some 16,000. So very close there indeed. And how this will affect the prestige of the Prime Minister is, of course, a matter for speculation at this moment. For the pro-O'Neill camp, also, of course, a disappointment in Lisnaskea, where Captain John Brooke has polled 4,794 and got a majority of over 2,000. This vote is well up on the his last by-election poll when he had 4,428. He's up there by 300 anyway. The unofficial Unionist poll is down as compared to last time. Major James D. Henderson polled 2,700 against Mr. Patterson's 3,270 last time. So it doesn't look as if there's been much of a change from traditional attitudes in Fermanagh, and Captain John Brooke seems well established in Lisnaskea.
Well, thank you, Billy. Now for a quick word from David Butler in our Balmoral studio.
Well, in fact, Mr. Paisley got 38% of the poll. He was only 9% behind Captain O'Neill, and the total turnout there was 79%, which is certainly very high for that part of the country. I do think it's worth just doing a very quick check on what is still up for grabs in this election, in the O'Neill versus anti-O'Neill fight. The only ones that I see still to come, Mr. Craig in Larne, and on the form tonight, I should have thought,
hold that for the anti-O'Neill forces. Mr. McGowan in Ivey and Mr. Dobson in West Down, that's still to come. Mr. Anderson in the city of Derry and Mr. Taylor in South Tyrone. In the city of Derry, again on the local form, it might be lost on a split vote, not to a pro-O'Neill person, but otherwise. And South Tyrone, on the present form, I would have thought Mr. Taylor would be back in. So we are going to end up with, I would have thought, 11 or 12 anti-O'Neill people in the next Parliament. It is very much a mixture as before, and when you couple that with the blow to the Prime Minister's prestige in Bandside, you are in some difficulty in seeing a very tranquil future in the next few months in Northern Ireland.
A blow indeed for Captain O'Neill, as David Butler was saying there. Incidentally, it's very nearly a quarter of a century since he had to fight an election, because ever since then he's been returned unopposed. And as you heard the Reverend Ian Paisley afterwards, you've got a pretty classic example, I think, of the type, the flavour of his oratory. Perhaps on this point, Bob McKenzie would like to take up the story.
Well, I'm bound to come back to you, Norman St. John Stevens. We've had a full blast of Paisleyism. What was your reaction watching it?
Well, of course, seeing it, one can see what a very strong personality Ian Paisley is. And whatever one may think of his views, of course, one cannot, but in one sense, admire the strength of that personality. But I, in fact, did debate with him at the Oxford Union last year, and I saw really what he stood for. And one incident of that debate, I think, crystallizes the whole thing, when he held up a wafer, and he said, referring to the Roman Catholics, they believe that this becomes the body, blood and bones of Christ. And then he dropped this wafer on the floor. Well, now, that was a terrible thing.
I think I must interrupt you, Mr. St. John Stevens, because we're going right back to Ireland and to Mr. Paisley again, I think.
I said this contest could be won by the Loyalists. And as you see by the vote, Captain O'Neill, the great anointed one, the man superior to everyone else, the man who can't even come to his own nomination or come to the count, he is a minority candidate at the moment in Bandside. And Ian Paisley, despised, maligned, smeared and lied about by your organisation, sir, by you two, gets 6,331 votes. I think that's a great performance, and these are Protestant votes, Loyalist votes, on a plain platform that I put forward.
But
no compromise.
Still more electors want Terence O'Neill than want Ian Paisley.
That might be. It's 23 years, my friend, in the constituency.
What's your political future now here?
My political future, I have told you before, and I will tell you again, that I am in this fight because I said in the day of crisis I would stand as a candidate against Captain O'Neill if no one else would stand. And no one else came forward in the Bandside to be the Loyalist standard bearer. Captain O'Neill thought he was going to get a free ride, and I contested the seat, although my friend here said I won it off the hook. And that's the result, and it's a creditable result. And there's no use running down the result. It wasn't 331 votes. It was 6,331 votes, and it was a good vote.
You did say at one stage, Mr. Paisley, that you had 10,000 votes in the constituency.
I never said anything of the kind.
At the public meeting, you said 10,000.
I never said anything of the kind, sir.
Mr. Paisley, you also made the point...
Let me smell your breath. Let me smell your breath,
what does that
friend.
mean? No,
that means...
you said that in Ballymean on the street.
I never did.
I'd like to ask you one thing, Mr. Paisley. You did say that O'Neill had a policy of appeasement, and you said the ballot box would decide everything. Will you abide by this result? I mean, you have been beaten.
My dear friend, let me tell you, no politician allows the ballot box to wipe out his policy. He goes on fighting for his policy. Do you mean to say that when the Labour Party is beaten at the polls, it stops being a Labour Party? Don't talk nonsense.
But will you stand again if there is an election?
I don't think I'll be standing again, because there'll not be the crisis. O'Neill's going to go. The landslide is definitely against him tonight, and he's on his way.
Yet another of your ministers got only 5,000 votes against 10,000 for Richard Ferguson.
Don't despise, my friend, the voting for the Protestant Unionist. If that was some other candidate, you would be making much of that. 5,000 votes for William Beattie, a young man not long in that neighbourhood, is a magnificent vote. A very magnificent vote indeed.
What was your attitude to the Prime Minister not coming here?
I'm a Catholic. Does your vote tonight change your mind about going to prison? Can you tell me?
That vote tonight doesn't change my mind in the least about my stand. I'm going to battle on. I think this is a magnificent vote. I don't know why you want to all despise it. If I had got 331, I would have been kicked by the press. Because I've got 6,331. You want to kick me more?
Mr. Paisley, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You're due to be arrested on March 17. Does this change your mind?
Well, now we're going to move right across the province of Ulster and visit our outside broadcast unit in Enniskillen.
Mr. Who will govern acceptably to England?
Captain Brooke, you're back again with a slightly increased majority. As a strong critic of the Prime Minister, what does this result mean to your position in the party now?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, of course, I'm absolutely thrilled that I've actually increased my own personal poll and my own personal majority. So I've now got an overall majority and nobody can really put a hand to me at all. But, of course, the real basic thing is that I'm a unionist member of Parliament, which I've always maintained, and I have not, in fact, given any undertaking under any account what I would do under certain circumstances, because I do not know the circumstances.
Well, would you serve under the Prime Minister?
Oh, of course I would serve under the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister was requested to meet the parliamentary party, and even it had been like the Vatican Council to elect a pope. We should have been locked in behind closed doors, and then we should have seen smoke coming from the chimneys when we'd solved the problem of leadership. And possibly it would have been orange smoke, I don't know, but it certainly, we would have solved the problem.
Would you accept Captain O'Neill as leader of the party?
It depends entirely on the circumstances, which do. I am a loyal unionist member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. We'll be coming back to this in a moment, I think.
Right, we've just heard there's a very quick declaration coming up, so let's go straight over.
And in Bloomfield, there's a three-cornered fight between Robert Caldwell, Labour, the sitting member Walter Scott, Unionist and pro-O'Neill, and William Spence, Protestant Unionist and anti-O'Neill. The result.
Northern Ireland parliamentary election, Bloomfield constituency. I, the undersigned, being the returning officer for the constituency above mentioned, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Caldwell Robert, 2,196. Scott Walter, 9,084. Spence William, 3,568. And that the undermentioned person has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency, Walter Scott.
That was the declaration for Bloomfield, and now straight back to Enniskillen.
But Captain Brooke, would you accept the Prime Minister as leader of the party?
If the parliamentary party as a whole dealt with the problem and decided that that was so. But you know, this is a position which appears to have been accepted in England, that the Ulster is so barren of talent that there is only one leader who could lead a party in Ulster to an acceptable government in England. It's quite untrue. We produce 5 field marshals out of 9. We produce governors, we produce people all over the world, and it is quite wrong to portray Ulster as being incapable of being led to a path of righteousness.
Do you have ambitions for leadership yourself?
No, none. I'm entirely at the disposal of the party, and that's what I'm here for.
But Captain Brooke, to get back to Captain O'Neill, he has said in effect during the election campaign he doesn't want you back to Stormont. Can you now vote for him as leader?
I don't know what Captain O'Neill has said. I haven't really had time to listen to what he said. I'm afraid that on the government side, there has been an enormous amount of acrimony and a certain amount of dirt thrown at people, and I really don't care, because I am a loyal member of the Unionist Party, a parliamentary party, and I will deal with the problems as they have to be in the interest of Ulster as a whole.
Another problem for you and the other so-called rebels, Captain Brooke, when you go back to
We
Parliament...
are parliamentarians, not rebels.
Well, when you go back to Stormont, you will find there many, or several anyhow, unofficial Unionists. Would you be willing yourself to accept them into the official parliamentary Unionist Party?
That's the matter which one will have to deal with in the circumstances that exist at that point.
Well, what are your own feelings on it?
Well, my own feelings are quite clear, and that is that you are either a member of a party, in which case you obey rules, or you don't, and these people did not obey rules. and therefore there is no question about it as far as I'm concerned, but it's for the parliamentary party to decide, not for me or any one person.
Lord Brookborough, you yourself intervened in this election to attack the Prime Minister. So far, there doesn't seem to have been an absolutely decisive result one way or the other. So how do you see the future of the Unionist Party now?
Well, the reason I intervened was, first of all, having done a great deal to build up the Unionist Party, I saw the Unionist Party, through the action of the Prime Minister by calling an election, completely divided. And I'm perfectly certain that if you got the main party, which after all was responsible for the building up of Ulster, broken, then the country itself.
Do you think these continuing divisions are now inevitable?
What?
Do you think that these continuing divisions are now inevitable?
No. I think I'm not now a member of Parliament, but I think the job of the members of Parliament now, the Unionist ones, is to try and push all these questions on one side, deal with them behind locked doors if you like, but once more unite the great Unionist Party.
Do you think that's possible?
Yes, I do, provided it's handled with tact.
Do you think that your intervention was effective?
I might flatter myself on that. Whether it was or not is for other people to say. But quite obviously, I couldn't stand by if I believed, as I did, that the country and the party was in danger.
Do you ever regret saying any of the things that you have done in the last week?
No, I don't think I do. I think I was fairly restrained.
You, Lord Brookborough, you blamed Captain O'Neill for disowning the so-called rebels. But surely any Prime Minister with, to use a phrase of your own, fire in his guts, couldn't accept men who didn't accept him.
No, but he dealt with them the wrong way. Those questions, I've had to deal with them. When you get your members of Parliament who disagree with you, and they're quite entitled to do so, the usual procedure is to have what they call a parliamentary party meeting. There you can discuss everything, you can slang each other as much as you like, you can put all the points you like, and it's up to the Prime Minister of the day to get as near settlement as he can. If he can't, then he's got to go.
Lord Brookborough, who would you like to see leading the Unionist Party, if not the Prime Minister?
I'd be perfectly happy when the parliamentary party has settled it amongst themselves.
What about your future now? Are you going to continue attacking the Prime Minister?
No. I'm here to battle for the Unionist Party, which you have done extremely well in this election. I'm delighted at the County Fermanagh. And now, as far as I'm concerned, I then go back into retirement until I see a danger again.
Now, Brookborough, you say you agree with the policies of the Unionist Party at the moment, with the policies of the government, but yet you do not agree with Captain O'Neill. Surely these policies are identified with the person of Captain O'Neill at the moment.
No, they're the Unionists. They're identified with the Unionist Party.
This is the great danger which the publicity machine has conveyed, is that the policy is the property of one man. This is the whole cause of the division, in my view. This is the acme of leadership. To be a leader, you must unite with the party so that it doesn't tell any difference between the leader, and the leader is only the spokesman of the unit.
But how is it possible for this party now to be united?
Well, under a new leader, probably.
Well, this leader, the leader you had the majority. Now, are we not...
How do you know he had the majority? You don't know. He wouldn't face the music.
Can I ask you, do you think he had the majority?
I don't think if he'd come to a parliamentary party, he could have had a governable majority.
Well, was it then necessary for you, Captain Brooke, and your friends to meet in Portadown prior to this meeting?
Yes, because we've been so blackened. We had to put forward our clear view that it was leadership and not policy, and it still is policy.
Yeah, I come in on that. In my time, and in Mr. Andrews' time, my predecessor, they used to meet privately like that, discuss these various points before bringing them up to the parliamentary party.
Lord Brookborough, Captain Brooke, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I did say at the beginning of the programme that this was a rather complex election, because there you have a man, John Brooke, talking to our own David Lomax and explaining that although he stood specifically as an anti-O'Neill candidate, he would nevertheless, under certain circumstances, be prepared to serve under him as leader. You worked that out for yourselves. Incidentally, you may have seen the news earlier, flashed on your screens, that 4 people have been arrested for impersonation in Londonderry. We may get around to explaining that later in the programme, but in the meantime, we've had a spot of trouble back here in London, nothing to do with elections. But police reported at midnight that demonstrators in South Moulton Street near Claridge's Hotel turned over a white 1100 car and then tried to set it on fire. They failed, but they grabbed dustbin lids and hurled them at other parked cars. point of that being, of course, that President Nixon at this moment is installed inside Claridge's. Now, so that we could go over to get another taste of the Reverend Ian Paisley, I'm afraid I somewhat rudely interrupted Mr. Norman St. John Stevens in full flow, so let me go back to him and Bob McKenzie now.
Norman, would you care to wind the peroration up on that?
Yes, I will. I must congratulate Mr. Paisley on being able to interrupt me in full flow. Few people have been able to do it so successfully. But the point I was trying to make by recalling that incident at the Oxford Union is that while I agree that Mr. Paisley is quite obviously sincere, what he is animated by is hate. And what I fear is that because he has had this very good result for him, he will in fact be strengthened in promoting the forces of hate in Northern Ireland, and one could see that hate when he referred to Captain O'Neill, for example, as a traitor. Well now, if we think of our system here at home, no politician would refer to another in the House of Commons as a traitor, because it would indicate a hatred which, thank heavens, is foreign to British politics.
Well, let's look at the position of O'Neill now, because I think this result, in which he won by only 9% over Paisley, and O'Neill won with less than half the vote in his own constituency, is surely going to be his real problem, Paul Rose, that he is personally badly damaged. He comes back with a badly divided party, open question of whether he has a majority of 1 or 2 within the party.
Well, I think the result was in fact symptomatic of the sickness in Northern Ireland, that this antediluvian character, straight from the 18th century, a man who wraps himself around with the Union Jack and then quite unashamedly works against the kind of political standards and political decencies which we accept on this side of the Irish Sea, is able to get that kind of vote, does indicate what we're up against. And this is what the Campaign for Democracy in Ulster and the civil rights people have been saying all along.
What chance do you give O'Neill in this situation?
Well, in this situation, it seems to me that O'Neill is going to become increasingly under pressure. I think even from some of those who, until now, have probably been loyal to him. And if this goes on, if O'Neill faces increasing pressure from the right wing, a sort of Lardner-Burke situation in Northern Ireland, then I believe that on this side of the Irish Sea there's going to be increased clamour for direct government intervention, that this is the only possible way of bringing Northern Ireland into the 20th century.
You're both MPs. What could, in fact, the government at Westminster or the Parliament, British Parliament, do if it chose to intervene in Northern Ireland?
Well, the British government has every right to intervene. Under the Government of Ireland Act, Section 75, we have residual powers. We can govern if we wish directly. But I think there are other things one can do. One has an enormous financial pressure. An eighth of the incomes in Northern Ireland come from social security benefits, for example. And we subsidise Northern Ireland to the tune of over £100 million a year. And I think possibly the purse strings could be more effective than direct political intervention.
But short of that, is there any question, though, of O'Neill, do you think, being able to govern with part of his own party and some of the opposition parties, the tiny groups that are being elected, which might together give him a working majority?
I think this is problematical. The difficulties you can see with people like Paisley is that they regard him as a traitor and that they have a great deal of support. And faced with the possibility of some sort of coalition between the O'Neill forces on the one side and, say, the Northern Ireland Labour Party nationalists on the other side, I think you would find an increasing number of so-called loyal unionists who would move towards the Paisley camp, and I think this is a very grave danger.
But I think one mustn't exaggerate the success of the Paisleyites. The Reverend Ian Paisley himself had a great success, but it was notable that the 3 other anti-O'Neill extreme Protestant candidates were in fact all defeated. And I think a lot in this situation does depend on the skill and the courage and the determination of Captain O'Neill. After all, he has won his seat. He probably will just about have a majority in the election. And what he must do is he must stand firm and he must fight for his rights and fight for his cause. Nobody cares ultimately about a person. It's what a person stands for. And he stands for ordered progress in Northern Ireland, and there is no one, in fact, to replace him.
What was your reaction, though, to Paul Rose's entertaining of the idea of some kind of intervention from London?
Absolute horror. The idea that we should be enmeshed in that situation. And I think we should do everything we possibly can to avoid this. I think we must be prepared, because Ulster is part of the United Kingdom, to intervene as a last resort, but it must be absolutely plain that it is the very last resort, because it would land us in troubles which we have seen just a touch of on the screens this evening.
Well, let's at this point take a look at our scoreboard. There you are with 26, 28, 34 results in. The Unionist, the official Unionist, that is, at the top of the board with 26 seats already in the bag, and 2 for the unofficial Unionist. Now, of course, perhaps one should have said at the beginning of this programme that the Unionist Party was bound to win this election. The point really about it is as to what kind of Unionist they are, and I repeat, whether they are pro or anti-O'Neill Unionist, and whether in fact the party can be split. Whatever happens when that board is completed, the Unionist and the unofficial Unionist together will have without doubt won this election, but whether Captain O'Neill will or not is a rather different matter. Well, now, I was talking earlier about that case of impersonation that we read about. In fact, vote early, vote often is an old Ulster custom, impersonating voters on the electoral roll who are either not in Ireland or are in fact dead. Now, the roll of voters was made in 1967. It contains the names, I gather, of about 21,000 people who've since died. Now, with some of the contests expected to be close, we've seen some of them already are, digging up the dead votes could have made all the difference. Now, if past history is followed, dug up, some of them will be, some of them, it looks, are being. David Lomax reports on the resurrection vote.
It may sound rather curious, but then so much of Ulster's electoral practice is rather curious. But these are some of the people who could have voted in today's elections, voted according to Ulster's ancient electoral sport of personation. This is how it works. If anyone dies after the last electoral register has been compiled, and the present one is 18 months out of date, then it sometimes happens that another voter can be persuaded to vote for the dead man instead. And in some cases, the same voter can go into the same polling station to impersonate 3 or 4 dead men. There's no postal vote in Northern Ireland, so it can also happen for people who've moved a long, long way away and can't come back into the constituency on the day to vote. Well, impersonation, or pretending to be someone else, is strictly illegal, of course. You can be sent to prison for up to 2 years, or fined up to £200, or both. And in the last few elections, at least 22 people have been convicted for it. But even so, it still goes on. Well, and as you can see, there are thousands of voters here, and in Ulster it's been a standing joke for a long time that on election day the most important vote is the cemetery vote. Well, the secretary of the Northern Ireland Labour Party is Mr. Sam Napier.
Well, it's a way of life for some people at election time. I think there's a sort of morality about it all that there's nothing really terribly wrong, some people think, with voting, say, Labour for a man who's a Labour voter. It'd be unheard of to vote Unionist for the Labour voter. That's not the done thing.
How do they manage to get away? Surely in the polling stations there are people who are there to challenge people who are impersonating.
Each candidate has about 50 people in there all day doing nothing else.
Ulstermen say they can always tell a man's religion. In the death columns, the name of the cemetery gives it away, or the initials RIP. You can tell from the papers whether the corpse is a potential vote for you. Impersonation's been so widespread that any candidate who wants to win is forced to take it seriously. This is Belfast's Dock constituency, where, just like everywhere else, the parties have posted personation officers in the polling stations to apprehend any corpses that have suddenly come to life. And Mr. Jerry Fitt, Member of Parliament here for both Stormont and Westminster, says he's only survived with the most elaborate precautions.
Now, I have a book here, and in this book you'll find a lot of names of people who are dead. I have marked them off with a red pen, their election number, the number on the register, and the date on which the obituary appeared in the Belfast Telegraph.
But what do you do with this information?
Now, that information will be transferred to this board here. My agent will be standing at the polling station, at the actual ballot box. Once a person would come in to try to vote on this number, my agent will have instructions to let him actually get the ballot paper in his hand, to have the vote marked with the X on it. Then he will go over and call a policeman and challenge him with personation.
And has this sort of thing happened here at this polling station?
This happens at every election.
If you think someone's come into the polling station and they're not who they say they are, is it a very difficult decision for you to go up and challenge them?
Yeah, it can be very costly for you. We had a fellow once who did a lot of canvassing and went to this door and knocked and said, will you be voting tomorrow? And the man of the house was quite adamant he would be voting. And then he went on to say, of course, his wife wouldn't be. Her mother was ill and she was in England. This fellow thought that he would watch this one particularly carefully. So came the day and he was watching it particularly carefully, and this lady ostensibly arrived in, claimed that she was Mrs. Smith, said she wanted to have her vote, and he was pretty sure, because he'd been to the house a couple of nights before, that it wasn't Mrs. Smith. So after she had asked for the vote, he asked to have her arrested, charged of impersonation. The problem was that she was Mrs. Smith. She'd flown back the night.
David Lomax was reporting there. I've just heard, by the way, that 7 people now have been arrested for impersonations. Now, I think it's time to go over to our computer centre and perhaps to David Butler.
And Parliament will have 38 or more, probably 39 unionist members. Of those, by my reckoning, 11 are people who are known publicly to be committed against Mr. O'Neill, and a further 2 or 3 are labelled as uncommitted. And I suppose with the encouragement this evening has given, after the hopes of a great O'Neill triumph, they may be more inclined to be uncommitted against O'Neill than they were a few hours ago. So, and in addition to that, we do have the picture of the Prime Minister suffering a real blow to his personal prestige, with the Reverend Ian Paisley getting 38% of the vote in Bandside against the Prime Minister's 47%. A very humiliating result in view of all the poll expectations that there were. Still, in a Parliament of 39 seats, the Prime Minister is still going to have something very near to a clear majority. There will be 8 or 9 nationalist members in the next Parliament, 2 Republican Labour and 2 Labour members. The Liberal and National Democratic parties will disappear from the Stormont Parliament. But still, that is the overall picture. A massive turnout, no excuses of people staying away, no very clear evidence about how the Catholics have voted. There's one seat, that Larkfield, which is 50% Catholic, which gave 60% of its vote to the Unionist official O'Neill candidate. So there are cases, unquestionably, where quite large blocks of Catholic votes went to Unionists. But there certainly isn't the picture that was sometimes forecast in the papers over the weekend of some fairly massive desertion of the anti-Unionist parties. Indeed, one of the most striking results, I think, has been how well the People's Democracy candidates have been doing. I reckon that only 3 deposits all told have been lost tonight, one by an unofficial O'Neill Unionist against Mr. Faulkner, and 2 by Catholic parties one by a Labour candidate and one by a Republican Labour candidate splitting the vote in Larkfield. Those are the only deposits lost out of the 35 results we've had in so far this evening. So we have a picture of people voting for candidates in a most uneven way, voting for personal candidates, and Mr. O'Neill winning the election, but by so much smaller a margin than he hoped that many people will count his defeat. Over to Vincent Kane.
It's supposed to be impossible to shock a newspaperman, but believe me, there were 4 very startled journalists here when the result came through from Bandside. Indeed, I think it's fair to say you've been surprised all night by these results. You've had a little time to catch your breath. Martin Wallace, what's your overall opinion?
Well, I think we were prepared to be surprised because this was a terribly hard election to read in advance. Certainly there's been a blow to Captain O'Neill's prestige. Certainly his gamble, while one can't say it has absolutely failed, certainly hasn't succeeded as he would hope it would succeed. My feeling is that if one looks at the likely Unionist party which will be at Stormont, that there's not yet the basis of a stable governing party. Now, where this comes from, I don't know.
This is the question I wanted to put to you. Where does Northern Ireland go from here? This election was called because there was a deadlock. It appears that there's still a deadlock.
Well, I think we're seeing great currents of change in Northern Ireland at the moment. One could say, right, O'Neill must go, and the Unionist Party looks for another Prime Minister. I don't myself at the moment see who the Prime Minister is, who the alternate Prime Minister is, who could do the job any more satisfactorily, because I think there are these trends. I think the Unionist Party is changing. but it hasn't completed the change that O'Neill hoped it might do at this election.
Well, can I ask James Kelly, who represents a different newspaper and a newspaper with a different point of view, whether he sees any alternative to deadlock?
Well, I can see the shadow of Mr. Brian Faulkner, O'Neill's old rival, looming up in this sort of situation. Certainly this Paisley vote was a tremendous setback for the Prime Minister, and when he goes back to Parliament, I can see nothing but party wrangling. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Faulkner emerged out of the ruckus then.
But hasn't the enmity and the bitterness between official unionist candidates and unofficial meant that even Mr. Faulkner wouldn't be able to heal the wound? Isn't the Unionist Party the real casualty of the last 6 months?
Certainly the Unionist Party has been torn apart as never before. And it's an extraordinary picture that's emerged tonight. And I'm sure that Mr. Harold Wilson and Mr. Heath, who are very much interested in Mr. O'Neill's future, must be wondering what's happening in this part of the United Kingdom. There may even be great difficulties involving the Constitution eventually out of this.
Mr. Pawley, what's your last word on all this?
I think that certainly if the trend at the moment that we've seen means anything, and it seems to indicate that there'll be about at least 12, possibly more, anti-O'Neill unionists returned, then it's clear that the Prime Minister has got another hornet's nest on his hands inside the parliamentary party.
What sort of initiative, Mr. Boyd of the Tribune, what sort of initiative can save the situation for Northern Ireland?
Frankly, I don't think anything can save O'Neill now by the look of the results tonight. I'm confirmed in my view that it's impossible for the Unionist Party to reform Northern Ireland or to change opinion in Northern Ireland. And I disagree completely that great changes have taken place in the Unionist Party. They have not. That's one point. Second point is that this election shows, as previous elections have shown, the utter ineptitude of the opposition parties in Northern Ireland, their absolute failure to face up to their responsibilities, their petty bickering amongst one another, the evident disarray in their ranks in this election. And I honestly think that if Harold Wilson is going to live up to what he said about O'Neill, he will have to certainly have another look at the Constitution of Northern Ireland and at the Government of Ireland Act, because there's nothing within the Constitution of within the Government of Ireland Act that prevents the Westminster Parliament exercising its authority under Section 75 and assuming full responsibility for Northern Ireland. As a matter of fact, I read in one of the newspapers on Sunday where a former chief of the Civil Service of Northern Ireland had said that the Northern Ireland Parliament should now be completely abolished.
Aren't you being a little pessimistic, though, about Labour's performance tonight? I'm taking the point that one of the politicians made. In two constituencies, two significant constituencies, Labour won. And this isn't the Republican Labour Party. They won Falls, which is a Catholic seat, and they won Old Park, which is a Protestant seat.
Yes.
Now, isn't this hopeful?
Not hopeful at all, because the vote that put Labour in Old Park is a Catholic vote. The Labour Party in 1925 had 4 seats at Stormont. It now has 2. There is absolutely no hope for the Labour Party in its present form. In 1958, when they won 4 seats, the Labour Party predicted a Labour government within 20 years. 11 years have passed since then. They were predicting 5 seats. They were predicting opposition within 5 years. Hopeless.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Well, now we're going to have a nip over, I think, to Enniskillen and have a look at the pictures there. You'll see at the moment in Enniskillen people are still hard at work, with, of course, many results still to come in, and the counters are still hard at work there. Well, an interesting sidelight now. We're going to have a look, as it were, from the outside. In the 24 Hours special studio in London at the moment, there are politicians discussing our very elections. So it might be very interesting if we went across and tried to, as it were, eavesdrop on them.
Well, we've been eavesdropping on you, Michael, most of the evening, and we've been watching and sharing your surprise at some of the results. Added to that has been our own perplexity, I think, a lot of the time. But one thing we have been discussing in the studio, and could now, I think, usefully pursue, is the reaction in Westminster to this result and the way it's looking now, and in what sense the government, perhaps, here at Westminster may feel it needs to interfere. With Bob McKenzie now, Norman St. John Stevens and Paul Rose.
Let me start with you, Paul Rose, as a Labour MP. You did say there were circumstances in which you thought the government in London might have to intervene in Northern Ireland. To many people this will seem odd, because the people of Northern Ireland have had their own election. They voted in a certain way. What would be the justification, in your view? What set of circumstances would have to develop in Northern Ireland to justify intervention from London?
Well, we seem to have arrived at something of a stalemate in this election. And in this situation, if Captain O'Neill is not able to keep pace with the growing demands of the civil rights organisation for universal suffrage, for example, at local government level, for redrawing of electoral boundaries and this sort of demand, then one can see very quickly a situation arising which I think Michael Farrell described in an earlier interview.
That was one of the people running for the People's Democracy.
Yes, that's right. Michael Farrell, I caught the words mentioned, back to the streets. And it may well be, in this situation, if one doesn't see progress in Northern Ireland, that the civil rights people will feel compelled to go back to the streets. We then arrive at the situation that we were in prior to the election. And if violence increases, and I hope this won't be the case in Northern Ireland, then I see no alternative but for the government at Westminster to use its powers under the Government of Ireland Act, and, if necessary, to govern directly, or...
You mean literally suspending the Parliament of Northern Ireland? If it appears that he is an agent of the government in London, isn't his position desperately difficult? May not he be overtaken on his right flank by the people who are against his leadership?
Well, I think there's been a great deal of restraint by those of us who consistently over a number of years have advocated equal civil rights in Northern Ireland as compared with those on this side of the Irish Sea. And Captain O'Neill has been given his chance. He's gone to the country, he's been very courageous in what he's done, but if he isn't given a clear majority, if we're faced with a situation where 250,000 people have no right to vote, where there are special powers which would be the envy of the government of South Africa, for example, then I believe that it's the obligation of a democratic government in the United Kingdom, as a last resort, and I emphasise only as a last resort, to intervene in this situation.
Norman Stevens.
Yes, well, I wouldn't disagree with that analysis. I might put emphases in a slightly different way. I think the future of Northern Ireland today, as before, rests in Northern Ireland's own hands. I think this is an indeterminate election result. Whatever may or may not happen to Captain O'Neill, what is important is that moderate policies should be pursued, but in the long run, if there is disorder in Northern Ireland, if there is a breakdown of law and order, then the United Kingdom Parliament cannot shirk its ultimate legal and moral responsibility for the maintenance of civil rights in what is an integral part of the United Kingdom.
Norman, thank you.
Well, there you are, Northern Ireland. There's the London view that we promised you, but we're anxious, of course, to hear what's going on over there. So let's go straight back to Belfast and to William Flack.
As we look at the state of the parties as they are at the moment, in fact, we have 27 official unionists, 2 unofficial unionists, 2 nationalists, 2 Labour and 2 Republican Labour. So that on this situation at the moment, it would look as if there are no further changes in constituencies, there would be a total official unionist figure at Stormont of at least 37. That is as before, with 2 unofficial unionists who are both pro-O'Neill unofficial unionists. The nationalists we might expect to have 9 seats. Now we come and look at the Belfast constituencies. First, Clifton here, which is the most interesting one. This is where the former Minister of Health and Social Services has been defeated by an unofficial unionist candidate. This has been one of the significant results in Belfast. Down now to Dock, a couple below. Here, Republican Labour have held it. Jerry Fitt, the well-known West Belfast MP at Westminster, has retained his double-seat position. Down to Falls, where the Northern Ireland Labour Party, linked with the British Labour Party, has won from Republican Labour. Down now to Antrim, where we have Bandside, which is the most interesting result so far, of course. This is where the Prime Minister, Captain O'Neill, has been able to hold the seat with a majority of only 1,400 votes.
William, let me come to you now. May I ask you a straight question on this one? In fact, how do you feel that Captain O'Neill has been doing?
Well, it's very difficult to say. He's had ups and downs. Of course, a good many of the people opposed to him have been returned. For example, Mr. West in Enniskillen, Brian Faulkner, former Deputy Prime Minister, resigned. Mr. John McQuaid's been returned. Mr. Burns has won narrowly, a junior minister resigned against him. Mr. Bowl has come back again, one of the leaders of the revolt against him. Captain John Brooke has returned in Fermanagh as well. And Mr. Craig has also got in narrowly at Larne, so there are quite a number of his enemies have been returned. On the other hand, then, he has had some gains, notably these 2 unofficial pro-O'Neill unionists have been returned. So that at the moment, of course, he is slightly up, I think, having regard to the fact that a number of people did fall out at the earlier stages. People fell out of nominations, as it were. So that probably he's slightly up at the moment, but the loss to his personal prestige in Bandside, where he's so narrowly won over the Reverend Ian Paisley. This, of course, is a factor which is yet to be assessed, and is quite a serious one, obviously. Can we look at...
And it's at this point that we end the 24 hours coverage of the Northern Ireland election. To us, at this end, at this point, it looks as if it may well be a sad day for Northern Ireland, sad in the sense of stalemate once again, sad in the sense that Captain O'Neill may well be back at square one, as we suggested right at the beginning of the programme. He could dangerously be. Anyway, that's it. He's left with his problems. The editor of 24 Hours is getting rid of a few of his, because I'm going on holiday for a week. But 24 Hours itself will be back tomorrow night as usual. See you then. Good night.